Marcus Thompson had always believed in hard work. He grew up in a small neighborhood, surrounded by families who struggled to make ends meet. His mother worked 2 jobs, and his father was barely around, leaving Marcus to dream of a better life. He promised himself that he would make something of himself, no matter what. By the time Marcus reached his 30s, he had achieved his goal. He was no longer the poor boy who spent his days dreaming of wealth. He had built a successful tech company from the ground up, and now he was a millionaire. His luxurious home stood on a hill overlooking the city, and he had every material thing he could want. But despite his wealth, something was missing. He had friends, but they were often more interested in his money than in truly getting to know him. His family, though loving, didn't understand the pressures he faced. And his heart, it felt empty. There was a piece of his past that haunted him, a piece he couldn't forget, no matter how much he tried. Years ago, Marcus had been in love with a woman named Jessica. They had been high school sweethearts, inseparable for years. Their love had been passionate, and their future together seemed certain. But things didn't go as planned. When Jessica found out she was pregnant, it threw both of their worlds into chaos. They were young and unsure of how to handle the situation, and Jessica made a decision that would change everything. One day, after a long conversation, she told Marcus that she had made an appointment for an abortion. She said it was the best choice for both of them, that they were too young to raise a child. Marcus, devastated and feeling powerless, supported her decision, though deep down, he was unsure if it was the right choice. They separated shortly after, each going their own way, and Marcus never heard from Jessica again. Life moved on. Marcus focused on building his career, and he eventually married another woman. He pushed the memories of Jessica and the decision they had made into the background of his mind. He convinced himself that it was for the best, that Jessica had done what was necessary, and they had both moved on. But now, years later, the past was knocking at his door again, in a way Marcus could never have imagined. One morning, as he went through his mail, he found an envelope with no return address. The letter inside would change his life forever. Marcus sat in his large, modern living room, his eyes scanning the letter in his hands. At first, he thought it was just another piece of junk mail. But as he read the words, a chill ran down his spine. The letter was from a young woman named Amara, who claimed to be his daughter. She wrote that she had been searching for him for years, and she was finally reaching out. Marcus couldn't believe what he was reading. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. The letter continued, explaining that his ex-wife, Jessica, had told him she had gotten an abortion years ago. But that wasn't true. Amara had been born, and she had grown up in foster care, never knowing her father. She had spent most of her life feeling abandoned and alone. And now, as an adult, she was living on the streets. Amara wrote that she had tried to find him for years, but she had no idea where to start. She only knew that her mother had lied to Marcus about the abortion. She wasn't angry, just heartbroken and confused about why she had been kept from him. Marcus sat back in his chair stunned. He could barely process the words. His mind kept going back to that moment years ago, when Jessica had told him about the abortion. He remembered the sadness in her eyes, the way she insisted it was the best thing for both of them. But he had never questioned it. He trusted her completely. Now, to learn that Jessica had kept their daughter a secret for all these years, it was more than Marcus could handle. His heart felt heavy with guilt. How could he not have known? How could Jessica have kept something so important from him? He thought about the life he had built, the family he had started with his wife, and now, this new life that he didn't even know existed. The weight of the situation made him feel small, helpless. Marcus set the letter down on the table and ran his hands through his hair. He was a successful businessman, used to solving problems, used to facing challenges head-on. But this was different. He had no idea where to even begin. His thoughts were racing, and his emotions were all over the place. He didn't know what to feel. Anger, confusion, guilt, or was it a sense of hope? a desire to meet the daughter he never knew he had. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just ignore this. He had to find Amara. He had to meet her, learn her story, and understand why everything had gone so wrong. He reached for his phone, determined to make things right, no matter how difficult it might be. It was time to find his daughter. The next morning, Marcus didn't waste any time. He sat at his desk, staring at the letter from Amara, trying to think of how to find her. His mind was racing. How had she ended up on the streets? Why hadn't she reached out to him sooner? He had so many questions, but he knew one thing. He had to find her. He grabbed his phone and dialed the number of a private investigator he had used in the past for business matters. He knew this was different, but he also knew that finding Amara would take more than just a phone call to a shelter or a search online. The investigator, a man named Frank, answered on the second ring. "Hello, Marcus. What can I do for you?" "I need your help finding someone," Marcus said, his voice steady, though his mind was still in turmoil. "Her name is Amara, and she says she's my daughter." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear Frank jotting something down. "Understood. I'll get started right away. Do you have any other details?" Marcus explained what little he knew. Amara was homeless and had spent years trying to find him, only to recently discover the truth about her mother's lie. He didn't have much to go on, but Frank was confident he could find her. As Marcus hung up the phone, he felt a sense of urgency. He could not sit around and wait. He had to do something. He decided to visit a few local shelters himself, hoping that maybe he could find Amara before the investigator did. Over the next few days, Marcus visited shelter after shelter, speaking to people who might know her. He even asked around in some of the less obvious places, like food banks and local parks. No one had seen a woman named Amara, and no one seemed to know about a young woman who had been searching for her father. Frustration was beginning to build, but Marcus refused to give up. He thought about his own life, his success, and how he had built everything on his own. The thought of his daughter struggling on the streets, alone, tore at him. He couldn't let this go. A few days later, Frank called him back with a lead. There was a woman matching Amara's description who had been staying at a shelter downtown. She had recently left, but Frank had managed to get a name and a new location. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and drove straight to the shelter. When he arrived, he walked in and spoke to the shelter coordinator. The woman behind the desk recognized the name right away. She explained that Amara had stayed there for a few months, but had left just last week. She wasn't sure where Amara had gone, but mentioned that she had been asking about someone who might be her father. Marcus felt a spark of hope. He asked for more details, and the coordinator pointed him in the direction of a nearby park. Apparently, Amara had been there, sitting alone on a bench, trying to figure out her next steps. With his heart pounding, Marcus headed to the park, hoping he was close to finding her. Marcus walked through the park, his eyes scanning the benches as he moved. It was a quiet afternoon, with only a few people walking their dogs and children playing in the distance. He wasn't sure what he expected, but his heart raced with both hope and anxiety. He had never felt so uncertain about anything in his life. After a few minutes of walking, Marcus spotted a woman sitting alone on a bench by the edge of the park. She was looking down, lost in thought, with her hands resting on her knees. There was something about her that felt familiar, even though he had never seen her before. As he approached, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. His thoughts were jumbled, and he felt a nervous knot in his stomach. But then, he remembered the letter and everything that had brought him here. He had come this far. He couldn't turn back now. "Amara," Marcus called gently, his voice a little shaky. The woman looked up, her eyes wide at the sound of her name. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at him. She looked like someone who had been through a lot. Her clothes were worn, and her face showed signs of exhaustion. But there was something in her eyes, something that made Marcus' heart skip a beat. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice cautious but curious. I'm Marcus. Marcus Thompson, he said, taking a deep breath. I'm your father. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and almost unreal. Amara's eyes narrowed as if she was trying to process what he had just said. She looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. It was clear that she didn't fully trust him, and Marcus understood why. "That's not possible," she said softly, shaking her head. My father's gone." Marcus stepped closer, his heart aching at her words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the walls she had built up over the years. "Amara, I know this is hard to believe, but I've been looking for you. I got your letter. Your mother, Jessica, told me you were gone. But she lied. She said that you were gone. But you weren't. You're here." Amara looked away, tears welling up in her eyes, but not falling. She seemed to be struggling with something inside her, torn between disbelief and the faintest spark of hope. "I didn't want to believe it," she whispered. "I didn't want to believe that someone out there cared. All these years, I've been alone. I didn't think you even knew I existed." Marcus felt a pang of guilt, and he knelt down in front of her, trying to meet her eyes. "I had no idea. I didn't know. I'm so sorry." For a moment, there was silence. The park around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. Amara didn't speak, and Marcus wasn't sure what to say next. All he wanted was for her to understand that he wasn't there to hurt her. He just wanted to be a part of her life. Finally, Amara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do with all of this, with you. I've been on my own for so long." Marcus nodded, understanding her fear and hesitation. He didn't expect her to trust him right away. This would take time. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said gently. "I'm here, and I want to help you. Just let me be here for you. That's all." Amara didn't say anything else, but her eyes softened for a moment, and Marcus took that as a small sign of hope. Amara sat silently for a long time, her gaze fixed on the ground. The weight of what Marcus had just said seemed too much to process all at once. He waited patiently, giving her the space she needed. He understood that the years of abandonment, the lies from her mother, and the life she had lived on the streets had all built walls around her. But he also knew that it wasn't too late to break through. Finally, Amara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know where to begin." Marcus took a seat next to her on the bench, not wanting to push her, but hoping she would open up. "You don't have to tell me everything right now," he said softly. "But I want to know your story. I want to understand." Amara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and anger. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what it's like to grow up without a father. To have your mother tell you that he didn't want you, that he was gone. To think that you were forgotten." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had always believed that the decision he and Jessica had made all those years ago had been for the best. He had trusted her when she said the abortion was necessary. But now, hearing the pain in Amara's voice, he realized how wrong he had been to believe that it was the right choice. "I never knew," he said softly, his heart heavy with guilt. "I never knew that she told you that. I never knew you were out there, alone." Amara wiped a tear from her cheek, but she didn't look at him. "I was just a little girl," she continued, her voice shaking. "My mom told me I was better off without you. She said you didn't want me, that you didn't care. So I grew up thinking that I didn't matter, that nobody wanted me. But that wasn't true, was it? I wasn't the problem. She was." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never imagined that Jessica's lie had hurt Amara this much. He had always thought that their decision to part ways had been mutual, that Jessica had done what she thought was best. But hearing Amara's pain made him realize that he had been too quick to believe her. Amara sniffed, wiping her eyes again. "I've been in foster homes, bouncing from place to place, never really belonging anywhere. And when I turned 18, they just let me go. No one cared anymore. So I ended up on the streets. I tried to find you. I wanted to know if you really wanted me, if you would be there. But I didn't know where to start, and I was afraid to ask. Marcus felt his heart break for the daughter he never knew. He had built an empire, surrounded himself with wealth and success, but in all those years he had missed his daughter's pain. He had missed her struggles. "I'm so sorry, Amara," he said, his voice full of regret. "I never wanted you to feel like that. I didn't know. I should have known." Amara finally looked at him, her expression softening just a little. "I didn't expect you to be perfect, but I didn't think you'd be this stranger. It's like meeting someone who doesn't even know me." Marcus reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I may not know you yet, but I want to. I want to know everything about you. I want to make up for the time we lost. I'll do whatever it takes." Amara looked at him, her expression still cautious, but now touched by the sincerity in his words. "I don't know if I can trust you right away," she said quietly, "but I'll try." Marcus smiled softly, feeling a flicker of hope. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be fast, but this was a beginning. And for the first time in years, he felt like he had a chance to make things right. The next few days passed slowly for Marcus. He couldn't stop thinking about Amara and everything she had shared with him. The pain she had endured, the loneliness she had lived through. It weighed heavily on his heart. He knew he couldn't undo the years they had lost, but he was determined to do whatever it took to help her start over. Marcus made it his mission to make things right. He didn't want to push Amara into anything she wasn't ready for, but he was clear about one thing. He wanted her to know that he was there for her, no matter what. He spent hours making phone calls to shelters, social workers, and organizations that helped people get back on their feet. But as much as he was trying to help, he knew the real work needed to be done by Amara herself. He could offer her a place to stay, a fresh start, but trust, true trust, was something that couldn't be rushed. One evening, after Marcus had spent the day organizing some resources for her, he sat down with Amara in his living room. It was a quiet, comfortable space, but Amara still seemed out of place there. She hadn't quite found her rhythm in this new life he was offering. "I don't know if I belong here," Amara said quietly, her eyes looking around the room as if it was all too much for her. "I've never had a place like this. I've always had to look out for myself, make sure I had food, make sure I was safe." Marcus nodded, understanding. "I get it. It's a lot to take in. But I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm not asking you to forget everything that's happened, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Amara was silent for a long time. She looked out the window, lost in thought. Marcus waited patiently, giving her the time she needed. Finally, she turned back to him. "Why didn't you come looking for me sooner?" she asked, her voice full of hurt but not angry. "Why didn't you try harder to find me?" Marcus felt a deep pain in his chest as he thought about her question. He had asked himself the same thing so many times. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I didn't know that you were out there. I thought what happened between your mother and me was the end of it. I never knew you existed until now." Amara's eyes softened. "I know it's not your fault. I just don't know how to trust you yet. It's hard to believe someone would care after all these years." Marcus took a deep breath, his voice steady and honest. "I know I don't deserve your trust right now, but I'll prove it to you. I'll show you every day that I'm here, that I care about you." Amara looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since they had met, she gave a small, tentative smile. "I'll try," she said, her voice soft. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't a promise of instant trust, but it was a step forward. He knew that the road ahead would be long, but this was the beginning of something that had been lost for too many years. That night, as they sat together in silence, Marcus couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, they could heal together. It wouldn't be easy, but it was worth fighting for. A few days after their conversation, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about what Amara had said. The pain in her voice, the betrayal she felt. It all haunted him. He knew he needed to understand more about what had happened between Jessica and him, the decisions they had made, and why Jessica had lied about the abortion. If he was ever going to build a real relationship with Amara, he had to understand his past. Marcus decided it was time to confront Jessica. It had been years since they had last spoken, and the thought of reopening that door made him uneasy. But this was important. He couldn't move forward without answers. He called Jessica, his hands trembling as he dialed her number. When she picked up, her voice was calm, almost distant, as if the years had built an invisible wall between them. "Marcus, it's been a long time," she said. "I know," he replied. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." There was a brief pause before Jessica spoke again. "What is it?" "I found Amara," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Your daughter. The one you told me you had an abortion for." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear her breathing, but she didn't say anything at first. Then her voice came, soft but filled with regret. "I didn't want you to know," she admitted. "I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. I didn't think you were ready to be a father. I didn't think we were ready to raise a child. It was a decision I made on my own." Marcus was quiet for a moment, letting her words sink in. He had always trusted Jessica. And now, hearing her admit this, it felt like his whole world had been turned upside down. "I don't understand," he said, his voice filled with hurt. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie to me about the abortion? Why keep this from me for so long?" Jessica's voice cracked slightly as she spoke. "I thought it was for the best. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us. I thought we had no future together. And I didn't want that child to grow up in a broken home. I thought it would be easier for you to just forget about it." The words stung. Marcus had always believed that Jessica's decision had been the right one, but now he saw it in a different light. She had made that choice without even considering what he might want, what he might feel. And now that decision had cost them both years of time that they could never get back. "I never got a choice in this," Marcus said, his voice quieter now. "I didn't even know she existed. All these years, I thought she was gone. And now I find out that she's been out there, all alone." Jessica was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I never meant for it to be this way. I was scared, and I didn't know how to fix it." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to hold his emotions in check. He didn't know what to say anymore. There were no more words that could change the past. "I'm not angry," he finally said. "I just need to understand. I need to make things right with Amara." "She's lucky to have you," Jessica replied softly. "I hope she finds what she needs from you." Marcus ended the call, his mind racing. He had answers now, but they didn't bring him the closure he was hoping for. He felt sad and betrayed, but also determined. He couldn't change the past, but he could build a future with Amara. He knew that now more than ever. The days after Marcus' conversation with Jessica were filled with a quiet sadness. While he had received the answers he was seeking, they hadn't brought him the peace he had hoped for. He felt like he was walking a tightrope between his past and his future. The path forward seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had to focus on Amara now. Marcus spent more time with her in the following weeks, trying to understand her better, to build the bond they had missed out on for so long. They talked more, and sometimes the conversations were awkward, but it was progress. Slowly, he learned about her life, about the struggles she had faced, the friends she had lost, and the constant battle to survive on her own. It was a life he could never have imagined. They spent time doing simple things together, walking around the city, eating dinner at a small, quiet restaurant, or even just watching a movie in the comfort of his home. Marcus was careful not to push too hard, giving Amara the space she needed. He knew trust would take time, but he was determined to earn it. One evening, after a quiet dinner, they were sitting in the living room. Amara had started to open up more, sharing bits and pieces of her past, pieces she had kept hidden for so long. She told him about her fear of getting too close to people, how she had built walls to protect herself, afraid of getting hurt again. "I didn't think anyone could care," she said, her voice soft. "I thought if I let someone in, they would just leave, like everyone else." Marcus felt his heart break as she spoke. He reached out and gently touched her hand, offering comfort without words. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "I'm here for you, no matter what." Amara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "It's hard to believe that," she whispered. "I've never had anyone like you in my life before. I don't know if I can trust again." Marcus nodded, understanding her fear. "I know trust isn't something you can just give away, but I'm not asking you to trust me all at once. We can take it slow, one step at a time. I'll be patient." For the first time since they had met, Amara gave him a small smile. It wasn't much, but to Marcus it was everything. It was a sign that she was beginning to let go of some of the pain, even if just a little. The next day, Marcus invited her to his office. He wanted to show her the business he had built, not to impress her, but to show her that there was more to him than just his wealth. As they walked through the office, he explained how he had started from nothing, just like she had. He told her about the struggles he had faced, the failures he had experienced, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Amara listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought someone like you would have struggles," she said. "You always seem so put together." Marcus chuckled softly. "I may look put together, but it hasn't always been that way. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of mistakes, and a lot of learning. I guess that's how life works, right?" Amara nodded. "I guess so." As the days turned into weeks, Marcus saw small changes in Amara. She began to trust him more, to let down the walls she had built for so long. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she pulled away, but Marcus was patient. He knew it would take time, and he was willing to wait. They were starting to rebuild what had been lost, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. They were both learning how to trust again, how to heal, and how to move forward together. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a beginning. The weeks passed, and Marcus continued to be there for Amara. Every day felt like a new challenge, a new step toward rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't always easy, but slowly they began to understand each other. Marcus could see the trust growing in Amara's eyes, even if it was just a little bit each day. Amara had started to spend more time at Marcus's house, and although it was still a bit uncomfortable for her, she was starting to feel like she belonged. She had a room of her own now, something she had never truly had before. She even began to get involved in the small things, like helping Marcus with his daily routines and sharing meals together. These were simple things, but for Amara, they felt like huge steps. One afternoon, Marcus took her to the park where they had first met. They sat on the same bench, the one where he had first found her looking lost and uncertain. It felt like a full circle moment, and Marcus couldn't help but feel proud of how far they had come. "Do you ever think about how different life could have been?" Amara asked, looking at the sky above them. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "All the time. I think about the years I lost, the things I could have done differently. But I can't change the past. All I can do now is make the future better." Amara nodded, her eyes distant. "I never thought I'd get this far. I didn't think anyone would care enough to find me. I didn't think anyone would want to be a part of my life." Marcus reached over and took her hand gently. "You've always mattered. I should have been there for you sooner, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, Amara smiled a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "I'm starting to believe you," she said quietly. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling a rush of emotion. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. He had spent so many years thinking about his career, his success, and his future, but now he realized that this relationship with Amara was what mattered most. As they sat there, watching the sunset, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew there was still a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. They had both suffered, both carried burdens, but now they were walking together toward a new beginning. "I don't know what the future holds," Amara said, looking at him, "but I think I'm ready to find out." Marcus smiled. "Me too." The pain of the past wasn't gone, and it might never fully fade, but they had learned to forgive, to heal, and to move forward. Together, they were starting something new, a future filled with possibilities, trust, and love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, Marcus knew that he and Amara could face whatever came next as father and daughter.